Anybody that works in disaster will tell you all disasters are local. Everything that we do, we're going to work through that local church. When we have the chance to set up a feeding unit, for example, our first go-to is there a church parking lot? Is there a church that can host us? Because we want those who are receiving the food to associate that church building, that place, with somebody helped me from that place.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Rural Renewal Podcast. We're so excited to have you with us again this week or today. And we're excited. Kathleen, how are we doing this week?
We're doing well. I think for some people, I know you're almost at the end of the school year. We still have, I think, 4 or 5 weeks left of school, and so we're getting there, but we're not quite there as close as some people are around the country. And so we're still in the midst of the end of the year chaos.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the Northeast school schedule is a little odd. We tend to end school like mid-June and sometimes even late June, and start back again. Our kids usually a little bit, but like the week before Labor Day. But anyways, yeah. So it tends to be a little. It lingers, and also, yeah, we're definitely in the midst of. Not that our oldest daughter doesn't. She's a freshman in high school, so this is sort of like first round on finals. Except mostly, I think she maybe has one final, which she's taking very soon, because they're renovating the math building. So anyways, it's her math class. So, and then the rest of them are all projects. So anyways, it's not as stressful for her as I thought it was going to be. But yeah, we're definitely in the midst of there's always a lot of stuff at the end of the year. I feel like, I felt like this was even like crazier. There was one year at the end of COVID. You remember when like they tried to pack, like we finally were allowed to do stuff together again. And so they try to pack like everything we didn't do for an entire school year into like a month and a half. And it was, I think it was like, it must've been 2022 or something like that. It was just insane. Right. It's not quite as crazy right now, but there is a lot of like kiddo stuff going on. That's always true in the spring, and it's always true towards the end of the school year. But anyways, it's fun. It gives us a lot of opportunity to see our neighbors and to interact with the community and people that aren't necessarily people who we see at church. So that's always good. But yeah. It's good. It's hectic, and it's fun times. So hopefully, no matter where you are and kind of in the schedule of where your life goes, this podcast, we give you a chance to just think a little bit about what God's called you to, and hopefully give you some ideas about how to be the people God's calling you to be. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about a topic that definitely doesn't, I don't think, put us in the mindset of being the people God calls us to be a little bit. If you're in a rural place, I bet you have one of these things. There are these basically Facebook groups for your town. Kathleen, what is the name of our Facebook group?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what it is.
I think it's the London Area Community Forum, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that it's not run by the town.
No.
Someone in our community.
And I think some towns do have them that are, I don't know why any town employee would ever want to do that, but I do think some of them are.
Yeah.
Many towns have multiple. We've at times had multiple of these. There's the one. Anyways, what's the maybe we should start with what was the kind of original goal, do you think, of these kind of community forums? Do you like
well, our particular one was after a disaster. It was a way to connect and get the word out, because after we had some flooding, this is
not our most recent round of flooding. This was actually after flooding. Yeah, we live in a place where it floods.
2011.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have processes in place in order to communicate with our community. And so it started out as that. It has not stayed that way. And it's really just a place that people can post like what's going on in our community. If someone's dog ran away, they'll post it on that page. And if, a store has, their opening, they might post something on the page. However, sometimes the posts are probably not the kindest, or the comment section isn't the kindness. And I sometimes struggle with that, because there's some stuff that's really helpful to know what's going on in your community. And then there's some times where you're just like, I need to log off because this is too much for me. And I don't know. I know that Facebook has its pluses and minuses and that kind of thing. I've still continued to be on Facebook because in our community, a lot of people are on Facebook. I don't know if I would be if our community wasn't sort of geared around Facebook. So I think that one thing that I've done personally is I don't have Facebook on my phone. I only have it on my computer. And so I feel like I don't get sucked in quite as much. But I think it's important to know what's going on in your community. And so that's why I haven't completely logged off of Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's and I don't quite frankly, this is not a conversation where we're going to tell you this is how we think the best way to interact on this kind of thing
absolutely
is.
Not.
For the most part, for us, we are lurkers. I don't think we post church stuff on the forum sometimes because people do go to it for stuff like that. I'm definitely a lurker when it comes to interacting in terms of some of the Tom politics that gets its way on there and things like that. I don't feel like for several reasons. One, online Discord is what it is. And I am nothing if not someone who wants to kind of like process through things with people. You've probably noticed that in the way that I just approached the podcast. So, so like that's a hard thing to do. I actually do know a guy who lives a little ways away from us, a pastor, someone who we're in real life friends with a bit, but also Facebook friends, who does a really good job of like these long Facebook posts that really engage in thoughtful and heartfelt ways about like important topics, sometimes theological, sometimes kind of political, sometimes just whatever. And I am not great at that. I can do it in person, right? I mean, I think so. Generally, I like to know what's going on, and that is one way to kind of keep involved in that. But also, have just sort of chosen to not. I just don't respond on posts like that. It's just not my thing. I don't really post on Facebook hardly at all anyway. So this is not a hard thing for me to do soul wise, right? I would kind of prefer not to engage. So at least in an online format, but it does leave like, I'm not sure that's always the best way to handle it, right? Like sometimes a pastoral voice there might be helpful if you can do it well. So it's something I've definitely wrestled with over time. There's sometimes stuff comes up. I mean, you live in a place. I know most of the people who are posting these things. And it's also a subset of people, right? Like lots of people in town don't post, although it ends up being part of conversations you have with people sometimes because most people are aware of what's going on. And even the people that post, I tend to know, and I know kind of like where they're at on things. And so, yeah, there's definitely a difference in the way that we, of the reality of the world we live in now. That's different than the world we, probably that we learned about. Even if you're, we did seminary almost 20 years ago now.
Oh my goodness.
So I know, but we certainly did not talk about how to interact on Facebook in seminary. I don't know if they do now today either. They're like, anyways, who knows? But it is like, it requires thought and I think one thing I think that I've found helpful is to try to be kind of intentional about the reasons why I do interact online the way that I do, right? So I think I've recognized about myself, I'm not going to be real good at like typing or putting something into words in a way that engages well with the grace and love and conviction of Jesus in a space like that. Mm-hmm. So it's probably better for me not to. But like some people are good at that, and you probably should. I think that is something you really have to, but I think you want to think about that and think about what you're doing. And like in everything we do, right? It's important, because one thing it's easy, it's not like as pastors, we're immune from getting sucked into wanting to, just kind of state an opinion, and not really, and kind of lose sight for the moment of like the bigger gospel picture, kingdom of God focus that we're in our communities. So we have to be careful about that too. We are not immune from that. I'm certainly not immune from that. And that can happen on Facebook. It can happen in a conversation too. So you got to be careful, right? Like, I mean, I think one thing that's definitely true, you hear this all the time when you talk to people, they'll say things like, you got to be careful, when you talk about somebody else in a small town, because chances are the person you're talking to, unless you know for sure, they're probably related to the person you're talking about. So,
for sure.
that actually, quite frankly, is just, good advice in general. Like, don't, there's a reason that the scriptures have some things to say about gossip. Um, and that the goal, even with people, even when you disagree with somebody pretty reasonably, you have a reasonable disagreement with somebody on something about town politics or town procedure, or, who's being a jerk basically in town. They are still part of who God's calling you to reach with the gospel. Now, you're not going to reach everybody with the gospel, but you got to see everybody as a potential. So I think that's kind of how I've tried to navigate it. I feel like, Kathleen, you also are not really somebody who posts, certainly not in like the controversial kind of things that come up on the forum. So
no, I think the only time I post anything on the forum is when we have Christmas Eve, Easter, and trunk or treat. Those are the three major things.
That probably happens.
Maybe Kids Club are like our version of VBS, but for the most part, I don't post on there because I want to make people aware that there's a church in town, but I think there's better ways to connect with our community, and I think relationship is higher of a priority for me than it is about posting a tons of things on Facebook. So that's my take. But I think you have to know your own community. I don't think that what we do necessarily is the best. I think it's good for our context, but I can totally see how it could be the complete opposite in a different place. Yeah. And so I want to hold space for that.
Yeah. And also who you are, right? I mean, neither one of us are people who generally post, I literally, if you look at like my actual Facebook post, it's like 100% about weather. And like, not even that I talk about weather that's happening. It's like, if we talked about, I have a YouTube page for the West River Weather Guy, and it's sharing posts that the West River Weather Guy posts. And even as the West River Weather Guy, where I could do lots of like interaction with people, I just post links to my videos because that's like, so if that's true about you, like you don't have to be a great poster to be somebody who's amazing, in ministry in at least I don't think so, in 2025. Well, yeah, that's the year we're in. So, but you should, if you are good at it, you should do it.
For me, when I post, I'm mostly trying to share things. I don't share like the junk in my life for the most part. I'm mostly posting pictures of bread, my kids, or something like that's happening for, like our anniversary last year, I posted something, but I'm not like, maybe I'll post something once a month, I'm not like but I do want people to know that like, I'm trying to come up with a better term, but that I'm a human being. Like I want them to know that I have interests that don't just include church.
I mean, that you're a human being on Facebook is actually more and more important, because I think more and more my Facebook feed is definitely filled up with robots. So
yeah, that is true. So I think that's just kind of my take. I would rather the hard conversations happen in real life rather than online. So that's just my personality, who I am. And I think we can all have different philosophies in who God has created us to be and how we live that out in real life and also online life.
All right. So Kathleen, who are we interviewing? We just have one interview for you this week. Who's the interview this week, Kathleen?
We're talking with Dean Miller, and he's the team leader for Impact Missions with the Baptist General Association of Virginia. And so they've led a lot of mission efforts and disaster relief initiatives. And he has he just has a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciated that he talked about rethinking the role of the church and its community, and the importance of listening deeply to the people around you and embracing partnerships, working with schools, local organizations, leaders in your community to build trust and to meet real needs.
Yeah, I think this will be a helpful interview. It'll help you think about building those kind of partnerships and things like that. And yeah, good stuff. So without further ado, here's the interview. All right, we are still here at the BJAV annual meeting, and we are here with Dean Miller. And Dean, tell us a little bit about what you do and what Impact Missions is.
Perfect. So, Dean Miller, I serve as the team leader for the Impact Missions team of the BGAV.
Okay.
So, the Impact Missions team, if a church were to think of it as what a church traditionally thinks of as missions, so international partnerships, world hunger, disaster response, those kinds of things that the church typically defines missions as, outside of their walls kind of thing. Those are the kind of things that we work toward. And our goal in the BJV is to help set up those partnerships, those connections, those relationships that are traditionally kind of beyond the scope of a local church. They're not going to have a national way to respond to a disaster.
Yeah.
So we work on those partnerships and relationships to give them the venue and the connectivity to do those kinds of things. So we don't do the mission. We provide the avenue for our BJV churches to be involved in those missions. And it's global, it's national, it's all the way down to the local in Virginia to help folks do that. So.
Well, and certainly that's, historically as Baptists, one of the things that we have always come together to do is we recognize there are some things that as local churches, it's good to have autonomy as a local church, but there are some things we cannot do on our own, and we're not meant to do on our own. And having people there who can help us connect in the places we need to, because sometimes it's hard to know what are the resources out there, and you wouldn't know. And so it is so helpful.
And what ties into that is our longstanding philosophy in the way that we work, not only in Virginia but globally, is we always respect, always defer to local.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing something all the way, over in Nicaragua, which is something that was mentioned earlier today and other places, we're still going to work with the local indigenous leadership.
Yes.
They're always going to take the lead.
Yeah.
If something's happening in Virginia, we're not going to leave our offices in Richmond and go to Southwest Virginia and say, hey, we think you should do this. That's not how we operate. There are plenty of other organizations that choose to operate that way.
I wasn't going to name any names.
We won't name names, but we all know that there are some that exist.
Yeah.
And so we're always going to defer to the local. And so when a disaster hits, we build relationships in multiple places. So we have those relationships in place. But even in a disaster, they'll tell you, anybody who works in disaster will tell you all disasters are local.
Yeah.
So everything emanates from the local upwards and outwards. So we don't just pack up our disaster response toys and head someplace until we're asked to go. We make ourselves available, and we say, we're here, but we're not coming until you tell us we need you to come. And sometimes that's hard for our volunteers and others to understand. There's a disaster happening down in Louisiana. There's this big hurricane. Why aren't we down there feeding? It's like, well, we haven't been asked to go to feed any place. And there's a lot of Baptists between here and Louisiana that are filling that need.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to wait until we're asked to go and do the things that they can't do, that we can come in and provide. And because we do that, we leverage our gifts that we get from churches. We leverage our volunteers. We leverage that response where those folks, even in North Carolina right now, we're suffering from Hurricane Helene. They're our neighbors. They're good friends of ours. We work closely with them. In fact, right as Helene had hit, we had already been called by North Carolina Baptists to say, hey, can you come to Asheville? Here's your community. We're giving that to you. You come do feeding, you do recovery. You run that site for us. And we were about ready. We had a discussion. We were about ready to say, yep, we're taking on, until we got a call from Virginia that said, hey, we understand that Damascus and other areas around Virginia have been hit. So we had to call North Carolina and say, sorry, we're going to respond to Virginia because that's where we were asked to go. And that's our first call, to do that. So again, working with that local entity, not picking up our toys and running away, because there are a lot of groups, honestly, historically, but even just most recently, picked up their toys, ran down to North Carolina, Georgia to respond to the hurricane, But then all of a sudden there was need back in Virginia, but all their assets were deployed somewhere else, and they'd already sent money someplace else. So now here's Virginia, and they don't have the means to be able to respond. So that kind of, all that to say, that ties into not just our team, but I think the BGAV's philosophy of working with that local church and building up that local church, and knowing that that local church and that local community has the context, they have everything you need to be successful, and whatever it is they need to build themselves up, whether that's after a disaster or just quote unquote regular church ministry. So it's always good.
One of the things that I think is so good about that kind of model is both it keeps in mind the local importance, because one of the things whenever I've been involved with helping out, whether it's just doing kind of general service projects in a community with a group, or doing kind of disaster relief kind of things, is you're going to be there for a time, and maybe even a long time. Maybe some of these projects go on for a long time, but the church is going to be there a lot longer than you are, and the people still need Jesus when you leave. And so it doesn't mean that you're not doing that when you're there, but it does mean the partnering with the church gives them the tools and the space to do that.
And that's why in disaster response, but again, in everything that we do, we're going to work through that local church. So when we have the chance to set up a feeding unit, for example, our first go-to is there a church parking lot? Is there a church that can host us? Because we want those who are receiving the food to associate that church building, that place, with somebody helped me from that place. It doesn't matter who that person was in that particular instance. I don't care. I don't want that credit, because like I said, I'm not going to be there weeks from now, but that church will be. So they're the ones who are in that community. They're the ones who are going to stay in that community. And that's the one that the community needs to see as the ongoing face of Christ. And when we can do that in partnership together, then it's just bonus for everybody.
Exactly. Everything's working the way it
Everybody
should.
wins.
Exactly.
Everybody wins. Everybody wins.
You talked a little bit about Helene, but what did you do for Hurricane Helene relief?
So,
or maybe are you doing?
Yeah,
It's a better question.
It's a both
No,
and.
yeah, for sure.
It's a both and.
Yeah,
So
of course.
When the first call came, we immediately, at the request of local emergency management, deployed our feeding unit. So a mass care feeding unit. And over the course of a little over a week, we prepared approximately 10,000 meals for locals. For I think it was for 8 days. 8 or 9 days we were there. So we did about 10,000 meals. And then things got settled to where our food was no longer needed. Those hot meals were no longer needed. The community had kind of built back up. So pulled out the feeding unit. And then we come in. Of course, this all happens overlapping each other. So we did our assessment of damage to the community, always in partnership with local government and others, and discovered, the thing about not just Damascus, Virginia, and rural Virginia, but rural in general, is when you go, when CNN flies a helicopter over Florida and sees the damage from this hurricane that came through, and because you have neighborhood stacked upon neighborhood, house upon house, and something like that comes through, the devastation is just, it's horrific. And you can look at it and say, I could put 150 volunteers there for a week and you wouldn't even know that they had done anything because the damage is so great. But you go to places like Southwest Virginia and other rural communities where there aren't any communities of 250 homes all gathered together. They're smaller homes. They're in the hollers. They're scattered all around. There's some smaller communities that are gathered together, but it's not. It's in smaller pockets because that's just how rural life is, right? So it's harder to see. I can't go take a picture and have that effect that a picture from something like a huge neighborhood being affected by a tornado that came through. Yet, the emotional damage is still there. The spiritual damage is still there. The physical damage is still there. So it's harder to root out where the damage was, where the concerns are. And part of that is also, and I think this is to the credit of those who live, particularly in my context in Southwest Virginia, but I think in rural areas in general, is the fact that, and we experience this after like winter storms. So they know a winter storm is coming. So they'll stock up on food. The winter storm comes. It's devastating. Nobody can get out. Power's out. All these things like this. That's all accurate. But this family's in their home with their nice wood-burning stove and pots and pans that they can cook on and the food that they bought. They're good. They're fine for about 5 days, right? And all of a sudden, snow gets cleared a little bit, or they're out of food or running out of wood. Now, all of a sudden, there's a need. And this happened to us once, and then the second time it happened, emergency manager said, no, looks like we're all good. We don't have any requests. I was like, here's my phone number. Call me in about 5 days, and I'm available. And sure enough, 5 days later, can you send your feeding unit now? Because all of a sudden, we have 3,000 people who have come out of their homes, and now they need food, which is great for the resilience of those families. And also, that's not by any means disparaging. It's just the fact that it works differently.
Yes.
Whereas in a large community where there's thousands of homes and they all lose their power and all of that, all of a sudden you know that they all need help right then and there.
Right.
You know, so there's a resiliency there in the rural communities that doesn't normally exist in other places. But also what we find is a lot of times in more rural communities, they all have, and we all do, we all have our support systems, whatever they are. In a rural setting, something happens to a home, there's a small fire or something like that, there's family, there's others gathered, because they're a tight-knit community. They know each other, they love each other, they care about each other. So something happens, community rallies to help that family. Well, that support system fails when all of my support system is also affected.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And now we're all looking around going, wait a minute, we usually depend on each other, but you can't help me because you're dealing with your own stuff. And so that's when there's this, I don't want to say it's an aha moment, but it kind of is of, okay, so where do we collectively go to get some assistance? And that's where, again, we like working with local churches and others because, again, in a rural community, a rural setting, you kind of know the church. They know where it is. Anyway. If nothing else. And they know that, all else fails, that's probably where I can go.
Yeah, and I think I can certainly agree with the so we live in a very rural place in southern Vermont, and 5 years ago or so, I think our daughter was 2. She's 7, so maybe 6 years ago. We had end of November. We had a heavy wet snowstorm. Now we get lots of snowstorms in southern Vermont. Not usually a problem. People know how to deal with it. But pretty much everybody in town and the surrounding towns lost power for like close to 5 days.
And that never happens.
Not in
a wide scale kind of way.
And people in Vermont are definitely prepared to deal with. And it was interesting. Like the needs were still pretty minimal. I mean, and partially that's just because of the nature of rural Vermont. But you did see opportunities for people, even as simple stuff like. Need to charge a cell phone, and the generator at home is all that power is going to keep the heat on or whatever, and so. But I do think you're right. There's a scale all of a sudden where a small community there's a scale that small communities are built for. I love a few years ago we've had our town is on a river like most small towns, and we've had several rounds of flooding over the years. We'll have more probably, but there's a grocery, or it's like a convenience store in town, and they had been hit that summer, and then last December we had some more rain, and they're like the first place that floods if anywhere does in town, and it's sort of all of a sudden there was like 50 people there. Loading pickup trucks to get things out, right? And we can deal with that kind of scale, no problem. Everybody in town, everybody feels terrible, and they're like, "What can we do to help?" But there is all of a sudden a limit. You're right, where all of a sudden it's like we don't have resources,
and everybody reaches. Of course, every town, every city, no matter what size, It's just a matter of scale. Exactly. It's just a matter of scale. So the other thing though, again, not only just resiliency, but the level of community a lot of times that you find more in the rural areas is when we go and we're asked to come in and help or walk alongside ministries that are already there. It's amazing to sit at the table and you say, yeah, in order for this to work, we're really going to need X. Like we're going to go through gallons of propane every day. We got to figure out where to get propane. The guy's like, oh yeah, no, we got that covered. Mr. Johnson out here, he owns a propane company.
Yeah.
He's going to come by your place every 3 days and fill you up. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. What, where's all the paperwork? Yeah, no, we'll deal with that later. Don't worry about that,
Yeah.
And it's just like things just happen,
Yeah.
And again, it's about the community caring for one another and looking out for one another in ways that they are able to do in that particular moment, and the willingness for all that to happen is it's pretty astounding in a lot of ways. And that's not just in a disaster. I mean, we see that, when particularly in Virginia, there are two particular ministries, one in Bland County, one out in Nicholsville, that have ongoing ministries to their communities, food pantries, clothes pantries, just, doing anything that they can to help their residents. And so we're always sending volunteers out there as the BGAV. We're sending funds when we're able to help support them. And just seeing the work that they're doing, the relationships that they're creating, and just the care that they provide for one another when they're able to. Again, resources, they get stretched. You get to a limit to where we're grateful that these other places are there to step in when they need to step in and fill that gap. But they know nobody's seen Mrs. Johnson in a couple of days. Can somebody call? Oh, she needs a ride to the hospital. Yep. We'll get that covered. Kind of thing. So there's a beauty in all of that happens in urban and suburban settings, but it happens very differently. And I think in urban and suburban communities, it's more intense. It has to be more intentional. Whereas in more rural communities, it's just more natural.
Yeah.
It's just more natural.
Those relationships are kind of more natural anyway, just because you do know, even if you're an introvert who mostly wants to stay home, you bump into people, you got to go shopping.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So.
I'm gonna see you in multiple places, aren't I?
You are, yeah. So
because there's only one school.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all gonna be at the school together.
Yeah.
There's only 2 or 3 restaurants, so we're gonna see each other there. There's the one gas station, so we're gonna see each other a lot, aren't we?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
So it does sort of have a natural feel to it, those kind of relational connections. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so I know for us, we've dealt with disasters before, but when we see in the news, like, what was going on with Hurricane Helene and everything, and it's like hard to like even wrap your head around it. And then you're like, who do I help? How do I do it? Like from a distance. What do you like? How do you recommend the churches help from a distance?
That's a great question. I think one of the main things for anybody is, and this, I don't know how this is going to sound, but cash is king, right? So because it's not because people want money, it's just because it's so flexible with what you can do with it. If you want to give me a winter jacket, then it's a winter jacket, and I can't feed a person with a winter jacket. You give me $20, I can buy a winter jacket or I can feed somebody. So there's a lot of flexibility. So think of if I were a church or an individual, first thing I'd think of is cash. And you want to give that obviously to a trusted source where you know where it's going and what it's doing. And BJV is one of those, but there are others out there, and that's just up for the individual to decide who's their best partner for that. Beyond cash, a lot of people want to do something else, or they can't give cash, so that what else can I do? Before anybody would before you think about collecting any type of product, any type of good, make sure you already have a place for it to go. There are so many churches and individuals and organizations that even in the last month have called me to say, hey, we collected a bunch of clothes for the hurricane, when can I bring them? I'm like, never to me, you know. That's an easy answer right there, you know. Because I didn't ask for that, and by the way, nobody else asked for that. People just make assumptions. And people, you know, in their heart of hearts, they want to help.
Oh, for sure.
not mean-spirited.
They want to be
Of course,
helpful, and I get that. But always, I tell people, before you collect anything other than cash, make sure some reputable group has asked for that thing, and that they still need it. Otherwise, you're collecting stuff to throw away, and that's just the unfortunate reality of those kinds of things. So when we usually, like in Virginia, because we've responded to disasters in Virginia and other places, we already know in advance what's probably going to be a need after this particular type of event or in this particular area. You know, we know that, no, they're not going to need X, so don't even think about that, you know. But there might be a need for Y, so we'll put that on our radar. We typically, as a BJV, rarely collect any types of goods for that, because not only do you need to have the way to receive it, the way to process it, you also have to have the way that to warehouse it and or distribute it. And a lot of people, again, with good intentions, will collect things, but then there's no distribution method. And then you get into an affected community, and I've seen this happen, it's just horrible, where they'll drive in and they'll just open the back doors of an 18-wheeler that's full of clothes that have never been processed and just start, it's a free-for-all. And then you're just inviting issues. You're inviting division among those who get and those who don't get, because they just weren't there in time, because you didn't have a time frame set up, you didn't promote it, people didn't know about it, and all of a sudden those who have the means to get around, and maybe they had TV and they had electricity and they have a car, well, they heard about this, so they were able to get there. Others who don't have the way to communicate, or they don't have travel to be able to get to a certain location, they lose out again. Because they lose out normally in life when there isn't a disaster, because they don't have transportation or they don't have communication like others do. So you're just perpetuating that problem even more and more, even in a disaster.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to hear that, because we, you know, you hear something and you want to do what can we do, but what can we do that's actually going to really help? And I do think there's been more and more education about those kinds of things over the years, but it's still there. And because the last thing you want to be is certainly, you know, sometimes even unhelpful, obviously, when
absolutely
it can just be downright unhelpful. And that's the opposite of what anybody's trying to do.
And you know, I've never met anybody who was trying to do something like that to be unhelpful.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah,
They're trying to be
heart is in the right
Their
place.
heart is in the right place. But because that's just not their realm of where they normally live, you know, I get paid to do what I do, so I should know what I'm doing. You know, you pay me to be the expert in this, so allow me to do that. And to educate you in how to properly respond to X, Y, or Z, or whatever that is. And because not only does it waste the resource that maybe you've taken time to collect and sort or whatever, but then you have the resource of the receivers who now have to spend their time burdened with. Because as a receiver, again, when you've done it long enough, you build up some moxie, and you're able to tell people, no, I don't want that. Whereas other people will say yes. Kindness to their heart. They don't want to turn people away.
Right.
You know, and I get that. But I also know that you just created a workload for people who could be doing multiple other things that are actually helpful. But now they're sorting through old clothes that these people didn't want in their closet anymore. And now they're sorting through them. I mean, I'll never forget years ago, devastating hurricane through the Caribbean. So we're working in the country of Grenada, and we're like, okay, what can we do? And somehow we were not collecting clothing but all of a sudden, people just started bringing clothing and just dropping it off at our building after hours. I mean, we just come and there would be bags of clothes. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it wasn't bad enough that people were just dropping off clothing. The clothing they were giving were winter coats, high heels, prom dresses, the things that are in your closet that you wear once, that you never wear again. I'm like, this is the Caribbean. Sure, we need winter coats and high heels and prom dresses in the Caribbean, And it's I just sit there and go, and I got to a point to where it's like I'm not even sorting.
Yeah.
The bag's just going to go from this back to the back of the truck and then on to Goodwill or some other organization that's set up for that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
That's
what
what
they're
they
set
do.
up for. And they were very grateful.
Yeah,
to
I'm
have
sure
those
they
things,
were.
So it's like, great. We can use this. And
Yes.
It'll for and I was actually talking to a person on the phone about this very thing, and I said, when it boils down to it, that individual who donated that will assume out of the goodness of their heart, right? At the core of it, they were giving it away in hopes that it would help somebody. The fact that it didn't go to the disaster area, but it's still going to go through a process to a place that's going to
They
help
help
somebody.
somebody. Yeah. Yes.
I don't feel bad about doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
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 And when I told a lady who had collected a bunch of clothes from this hurricane, couldn't find any place, I was kind of her last call, and I'm like, yep, I don't want it either, and I don't know anybody who does. She was like, I could just hear the deflation in her voice of, huh, and I was like, but listen, I told her, I said, just take it to Goodwill. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's what they're set
It will
up
do
for.
good, and
it'll
yeah.
do good
Yeah.
work. The people donated it with the mind of helping somebody.
Yep.
This will help
Help.
somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit better about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been really good.
Yeah, awesome.
We've
Can I
known
ask
a-
one
yeah.
last question? I have one. Just from you already talked about asking for help, but if for a pastor or a church that happens to be in a rural area
Sure.
that experiences a disaster,
Yeah.
how would you? What's some first steps about how to kind of get in touch with?
Sure.
Certainly with Impact or other organizations that do the kind of thing you do. Yeah.
And I think it's important, and that's another hard thing for folks to do sometimes is to ask for that help, because and we've run into many churches. Usually, every disaster, there's a church that says yes to everything, and then they're overburdened,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they have all these things, a lot of which can be used that get donated to them, that then completely overwhelms their facilities.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's been 3 or 4 weeks. And the whole goal after a disaster is to get that community back to its normal or better, whatever normal is, right? Well, part of normal for any community, but even maybe more so in a rural community, is going back to church. Well, if their church sanctuary is still full of
Yes.
a bunch of stuff,
Yes.
they can't get back to normal.
Yeah.
And that starts making people angry. And I get it. They're not trying to be angry, but they are grieving. They're moving through an emotional and a spiritual process. And part of that is I want to get back to church with people who love me, who care about me. I want to get back to worship. I want to get back to normal. And here's my church. No, I did that with quotes. So
If you're not seeing the video, right? Yeah,
exactly. So, they, not that they take offense to it, but it is. So what we say to a church and a community and pastor is, I think, two important things. Is one, call us and ask us for help no matter what it is. And we're going to be able to do our best to connect you. If we can't do it, we'll connect you to a resource that's going to help you walk through whatever that issue, whatever that concern is. And we want to walk alongside, again, we're going to walk alongside those local churches and carry out that mission with them. Because like you said earlier, eventually, at some point, whether it's 2 weeks or 2 years, BGAV disaster response and all those volunteers will be gone.
Yeah.
And that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good
That's
thing.
how you get back to
That's
normal.
exactly right. But we want those people who were helped
Yeah.
to associate that help with that local community church. That's where it is. So that's one. Two, I want to tell pastors, take care of yourself. Pastors typically are of a nature of giving and giving and giving. And in a disaster, people are going to be asking.
Yeah.
and asking and asking. And at a certain point, you've got to pause. And especially if you've been affected in your home and your family are affected also.
Yeah.
But even if not, you've got to take care of yourself. I haven't seen a recent statistic, and it's been years since a study was done, but a study was done, I know, following Katrina, which was 2005.
Yeah.
Over 60% of pastors within 1 year of Katrina left their church because they were burned out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of that over 60%, over half of them left ministry altogether
Wow.
because they were completely burned out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the church didn't care for their pastor because the church was hurting too.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, just be honest, sometimes the church doesn't know how to care for the caregiver.
Yeah.
And the caregiver doesn't know how to ask for care.
Yep.
So my encouragement for not just pastors, but any caregiver,
Yeah.
you're going to get overwhelmed. You've got to take time to heal yourself, to breathe, step away. And for those who have been affected, recognize that in your caregiver and give them permission to take the day
Yeah.
and go and breathe. And one of the things that BJV and other ministries provide is that care to the caregiver. Some of it is let us come in and basically kick you out and let us do that work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or let us provide some care for you
Yeah.
in a chaplaincy type of role because you're used to being the chaplain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let us be chaplain to
Yep.
you, and because I think that's key because that's key to that healing, not only for that individual but for their family and for that whole community
Yes.
to be able to do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be key.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for your time. We really
Awesome.
appreciate it. It's
Yeah,
been a
yeah,
great
yeah.
conversation.
Awesome.
And really appreciate the work that you all do.
Yeah,
And,
and I look forward, as church development and Fresh Expressions and Impact Missions comes and works together. We have this bond of getting the church outside of its walls.
Yeah.
And recognizing the value that's there,
Yep.
recognizing that church is out there,
Yes.
and how do we lift that up? How do we support that? How do we empower that? If we're really about the kingdom, it's not my kingdom. It's not the kingdom of my church. It's really about God's kingdom.
It is.
And I just look forward to how we do that together.
Definitely.
moving forward. So that'd be awesome.
Really cool.
Thanks for the
Awesome.
time.
Yeah. Thank you.
you.
We really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Renewal podcast is brought to you by Fresh Expressions and the Ascent Movement. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in places we eat, live, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. The mission of the Ascent Movement is to create a thriving, collaborative connection for the church to live out the Great Commission in today's context. One of the initiatives of the movement is the Mustard Seed Initiative. Inspired by the message in the parable of the mustard seed, the Mustard Seed Initiative seeks to empower small churches across North America, enabling them to grow in faith and impact within their communities.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com. Rural Renewal Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbowen and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Jeanette Statz. Our senior director is Shannon Kaiser. A special thank you to Brad and Joni Perry of Alabaster Grace for the use of their music for our podcast.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
May God be merciful and bless us. May his face smile with favor on us. May your ways be known throughout the earth, your saving power among people everywhere. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Let the whole world sing for joy because you govern the nations with justice and guide the people of the whole world. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Then the earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. Yes, God will bless us, and people all over the world will fear him. Psalm 67.